Hello, my rats. I'm not being held at gunpoint to make this video. I want you to know I'm not. I'm not being held at gunpoint. I'm making this video because I genuinely believe this. Now, bear with me here. So M1 is Foxy Bro because, like, when you think about it, right? Because, like, when you think about it, M1 is Foxy Bro because like Foxy, Fiona, M1 Fiona, Foxy, M1 Foxy Fiona, you get that? And like we know like when you think about it, like when you really stop and think about it, like M1 Puppet movie 2, right? Puppet possess face change into puppet. So when you like really stop and think about it, like Foxy Bro face Foxy, M1 face not Foxy, but M1 associated with Foxy via Fiona. And so, like, I think that, like, when you really stop and think about it, like, we know that, like, Afton moves into the Murray house and he brings his children with him. And I think he puts one of his sons and he possesses that son with M1 Fiona. And, like, when you think about it, like, when you really stop and think about it, like, when you, think about it, like that makes sense because like when you think about it, everything I'm saying makes complete sense and I'm not being held at gunpoint. And actually it makes complete sense because like when you think about it, right, like when you really stop and think about it, and like a new video on the way, by the way, big project I'm working on. No, it's a lie. I've taken a long time to script this video, but like after it's out, I'm gonna really ramp up my production. And I'm not being held at gunpoint, okay? And like when you really stop and think about it, everything I'm saying actually makes a lot of sense because like when you really stop and think about it, like Crying Child David connections, right? Crying Child David, the theory that's been going on the internet, Crying Child Gregory David, all of them same. And so, like, how fitting then? M1 in Moon.exe implied to kill David Murray, and then Crying Child killed by Foxy Bro, who is Foxy faced, and we was doing Foxy face, and I like when you think about it, like it makes sense because like when you think about it, like when you really stop and think about it, and I'm not being held at gunpoint. I don't know why you keep out. I'm not being held at gunpoint, and like when you really stop and think about it, like that makes sense because Foxy face, Fiona face, Puppet possesses people, Puppet face. So Afton moves into Murray House, brings his son down to M1. M1 Fiona possesses him, gets Foxy face. That's why his face is so foxy. And like if you look at his eyes, like you look at Foxy Bro's eyes, they're the silver eyes, which means he's being possessed. And like we know people's face change when they're like when you stop and think about it, like the puppet's face changes when or like the people's face changes when the puppet possesses them. So like when you really stop and think about it, like it makes sense that M1 is actually possessing Foxy and then it kills David because David Crying Child, M1 kill Crying Child, they are the same. Foxy Bro is M1. Like, when you really stop and think about it, like, when you stop and think about it, everything I'm saying actually makes a lot of sense, and I'm not being held at gunpoint to make this theory. I believe this theory. I'm not being held at gunpoint. And when you stop and think about it, like, when you stop and think about it, uh, uh, um, the girls' room in FNAF 4, when you stop and think about it, like Scott wouldn't have known Elizabeth existed at that point. So like, why would he include the girls' room? It's because the girls' room is actually Foxy Bro's room. Therefore, Foxy Bro must be a femboy, and like in the 80s, that wouldn't fly unless he. When you think about it, like it actually does make sense because he would be possessed by a woman, and that's why he'd have a girl's bedroom. And Foxy Bro's a femboy, and he's got the foxy face because he's a femboy, but also because he's possessed by M1. And I'm not being held at gunpoint to make this video. When you stop and think about it, like that really makes sense. And and Foxy's never liked being looked at, right? That was his whole thing in FNAF 1, and when you heard something about it, like, that's also kind of his thing in FNAF 2. Like, Foxy, Frogger says he must be shy, and, like, Fiona is M1 because we hear she's embarrassed about being M1, and that's why she doesn't want people to look at her, because she doesn't want people to know about her as M1. And then when you really stop and think about it, like, it makes sense, because she then goes on to be a femboy, and femboys famously don't like being looked at, famously. So she goes on to possess Foxy Bro. It makes it a femboy, because when you stop and think about it, and, like, I'm not being held at gunpoint to make this video, and help me, and when you stop and think about it, like, that makes sense, and, like, when you stop and think about it, like, that all checks out, and the girl's bedroom, and again, puppet face in FNAF 2 movie, when like, you stop and think about it, that lines up with the Foxy face and the silver eyes that he has, like, when you stop and think about it, and I'm not being held at gunpoint to make this video, when you think about it, like, it actually stops, it makes a lot of sense, and M1 is Foxy Bro, and I'm not being held at gunpoint to say that. I believe it, and when you stop and think about it, like, it makes sense with the girl's bedroom and the Foxy face and the puppet face. He's doing Foxy face, and that would be racist unless he was Fiona, who is of course Foxy, and Foxy is actually a good guy in FNAF 1. He's actually just coming to check on you because, like, and you just get a heart attack because you're scared. But he's just coming to check on you because he's actually a good guy. And in FNAF 2, he's a good guy as well because he's actually a she. He's been trans the whole time. And when you think about it, like, that makes sense because Fiona, puppet face, girl's bedroom, Foxy Bro is a femboy, is M1. That all makes sense, and I'm not being held at gunpoint to make this video. Help me, and Foxy shares a bedroom with, where he shares his curtain in UCN with Bonnie, which is, like, Bonnie is always represented Afton, and Bonnie's actually purple because he's represented as Afton, and Afton curtain, it shows that Afton and Fiona were actually getting in bed with each other, even and symbolically, because they were working together, because Afton gave his son for M1 to possess, and now I'm not being held at gunpoint. Help me, bear with me here. There's a bear holding me at gunpoint. Help. Oh, happy April Fools, by the way.